Coming up, Joe Biden's final speech to the American people is filled with zingers, and not in a good way. Joe Biden's final address to the American people was characterized by a litany of self-serving lies, exaggerations, an attempt to put the speech in the same context as President Eisenhower's final speech to the American people, where he introduced and warned of the idea of the military-industrial complex. A quick observation: Eisenhower, Biden ain't. He starts off by speaking about the Gaza situation and Hamas.
Speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office. Before I begin, let me speak to important news from earlier today. After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, by my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team.
Biden claims that Hamas is coming to a ceasefire deal and a promise to release hostages as a result of 8 months of solid negotiations by his administration. This is 467 days since October 7, 2023. So, all of that time, and this deal is struck so soon after Trump's threat of all hell regarding Hamas, which terrified them. Biden's attempt to take credit here so long after the initial event would be like Jimmy Carter trying to take credit for the release of US hostages held in Iran in early 1981, after nearly identical circumstances and time period. In that case, it was 444 days. And then we have Biden lauding freedom in the time of COVID.
The century pandemic. The heroism of service members and first responders keeping us safe. The determination of advocates standing up for our rights and our freedoms instead of losing their jobs to an economic crisis that we inherited. Millions of Americans now have the dignity of work.
Biden talks of advocates speaking up for rights and freedoms, and it rings very hollow when people lost their jobs due to significant restrictions placed on them in terms of lockdowns, mask wearing, and vaccine mandates. This is the person who fired people for refusing a vaccine that has significant side effects, for choosing to exercise their freedom not to have a so-called vaccine injected. He seeks to characterize himself as a champion for freedom, where the reverse is true. It took the Supreme Court to reverse some of his mandates. The hypocrisy here is beyond belief. If you like this sort of content, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to further support the channel, you can buy a cup of coffee. Further in his speech, we shall see yet another example of totalitarian Joe in full flight against freedoms, in stark contrast to the way that he is trying to present himself. Then he talks of his success with jobs and NATO.
Decades to come. At home, we've created nearly 17 million new jobs, more than any other single administration, a single term. More people have health care than ever before. And overseas, we've strengthened NATO. Ukraine is still free. And we pulled ahead of our competition with China.
Here, Biden praises himself for the millions of jobs created. What he forgets to mention is that many of these jobs were bounce-back jobs from the end of the COVID emergency, and so cannot be characterized as new jobs in the real sense. He also lauds himself for strengthening NATO. He forgets that the only reason that this is the case is because he effectively green-lighted Russia invading Ukraine, creating significant fear in Europe, which resulted in closer ties. The patient died, but the operation was a success. The truth is that the world is a far more dangerous and unstable place than when Biden took office. And even before Trump takes office, we're starting to see the tamping down of some of these issues, such as the aforementioned Gaza hostage deal. And then we get to his oligarchs' assertions.
That's why my farewell address tonight, I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Here, Biden wants to warn about a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a small number of oligarchs. Didn't hear him complaining too much when Zuckerberg, Bezos, Gates, and most particularly George Soros were bankrolling his campaign, providing other financial support and criticising the conservative side of politics. It is only now that many of these people have seen the extremes to which the Democrats want to go that they have latterly swung away from the Democrats. It's interesting how often you find the names of political organisations that are the opposite of what the name espouses. Think of how many countries are called the Democratic Republic of when they're anything but democratic. The same thing goes for the Democratic Party. Then we get to the pay their fair share mantra, so beloved of Democrats.
People should be able to make as much as they can, but play by the same rules, pay their fair share of taxes. So much is at stake.
Biden complains that the wealthy do not pay their fair share in taxes, a statement that he repeats later in his address. Pity that he lies in order to further an agenda, yet he wails about truth and mis- and disinformation later. Again, always the hypocrite. So let's look at the reality. Here's a table from the Tax Foundation, but you can also look up Treasury data on this. You will see in the table that the top 1% pay 45.8% of all income tax, and the top 10% paid 3/4 of all income tax. That same top 1% that paid 46% of tax earned 22.4% of all income. So you can see that they're in effect overtaxed. In 2004, the top 1% paid only 33% of all income tax. So they're contributing more and more tax, not less, as Biden intimates. And then we come to climate change.
Right now, the existential threat of climate change has never been clearer. Just look across the country, from California to North Carolina. That's why I signed the most significant climate and clean energy law ever in the history of the world, and the rest of the world is trying to model it now. It's working, creating jobs and industries of the future.
Biden tries to link climate change, or climate emergency as he calls it, to the hurricanes and the LA wildfires, trying to distract from his, Newsom's, and the Democrats' more general incompetence. So let's have a look at some reality. First, let's look at hurricanes. You can see from the graph that the number of hurricanes making landfall of the continental United States, and you will note that there is actually a decreasing trend. This is not only for the US, it is globally as well. And this is true of hurricane intensity as well, just in case they try to spin this. Now let's look at wildfires. The first graph is the one that you are probably familiar with. Note the increasing acreage burned. But have you ever wondered why it starts so late? Well, here's a graph that shows the data going back for a century. As you can see, a completely different picture is painted in this case. Finally, rather than more people getting killed by natural events, there are now far fewer, despite a much greater population, and in areas such as beachfront that are far more vulnerable. And the final lie by Biden here is that there will be significant job creation as a result of green jobs and renewable energy. I suggest that anyone who believes this have an even cursory glance at what is occurring in Europe. As if this was not enough totalitarianism already on display, we get to Biden waxing lyrical about the tech industrial complex.
I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
Here, Joe Biden rails against the tech industry and their impact on the news. He bewails the collapse of the legacy media, who were so much in the Democrat pocketbook. He certainly does not like democracy of the democratization of news. He was very happy with the tech industry when they did his bidding, censoring anyone's viewpoint on subjects like COVID orthodoxy. There was plenty of mis and disinformation being pushed out by the Biden administration thanks to a compliant tech industry and very left-wing fact-checkers. Here we can see the true face of the Democrats. They think everyday Americans are stupid, and it is up to the geniuses in the Democratic Party to discern the truth for Americans, as they are clearly not able to make this assessment themselves. He is worried now, latterly, that the tech sector has worked out what totalitarian inclinations the Democrat Party has, and he wants to go back to the days where the Democrats could set the agenda and what was true. Freedom of speech and the First Amendment? Perish the thought. We already know their thoughts courtesy of John Kerry. It is dangerous and not to be tolerated. And we get more fair pay nonsense and other subjects.
We must reform the tax code, not by giving the biggest tax cuts to billionaires, but by making them begin to pay their fair share. We need to get dark money. That's that hidden funding behind too many campaigns contributions. We need to get it out of our politics. We need to enact an 18-year time and term for the strongest ethics reforms for our Supreme Court. We need to ban members of Congress from trading stock while they're in the Congress.
Here we have Biden starting with his favourite nonsense argument about the rich not paying their fair share again. But he also goes more authoritarian again. The Democrats have been very unhappy with the Supreme Court not doing their bidding. And with the realization that the court will be conservative for a long time to come, he wants judges to have term limits. He wants 18 years, which just coincidentally will help the Democrats in terms of retirements of a number of judges. Checks and balances to power? Not interested. The only thing I really agree with him on is the issue of insider trading by those in Congress, and this does need to be stopped. What do you think of Biden's final address? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.